Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Caution Arts at Play, and I am here to apologize for the fact that I haven't been here. Things have been a little bit hectic for me. There's a lot going on with school and a few things going on in my personal life that have made it difficult for me to upload regularly, so I apologize for that. But I do appreciate everybody's patience, and I would also like to welcome new subscribers. I'm sorry that I haven't really been able to put out any new content for you to enjoy, but I really do appreciate you coming along and subscribing to the channel, and I hope to start uploading more regularly again once things are a little bit less hectic. In the meantime, around Christmas time, or actually a little bit after Christmas, I had done a colored pencil commission, and I did record that, so that's the footage that you're going to see here. So in this first video, I am going to be showing you how I did the background in this colored pencil piece, and then in the next video, I will be showing you how I did the branches and the birds. So without further ado, here is the video. Welcome to the voiceover. Gosh, it feels like it's been forever since I've done this, but it feels good to be back. So before I get into how I did this piece, I wanted to talk a little bit about the background story of the piece itself. I have a close friend who commissioned me to do this piece. As some of you may know, I live in Maine, and my friend is actually from North Carolina. And he has been living up in Maine for a little while now, and he is engaged to a girl who is born and raised in Maine, just like me. And our bird, our Maine state bird, is the Chickadee. And the North Carolina state bird is the red cardinal, the northern red cardinal. So he had approached me to do this piece for his fiance because he wanted me to represent them in bird form. So that's why there is a chickadee and a cardinal in this piece, and I think it's very sweet, especially since I love both of these birds and I love to draw birds in general. So I just thought that that was kind of a cute background story as to why I did this piece. So I went out and I took multiple reference photos of each bird and I combined them and I set up the composition, and this is what I came up with. A nice snowy bird picture. So as far as the background goes, as you can see, I've already started to lay in some of the main shapes of the blurry trees that are in the background. This is mostly, you know, a regular bokeh background, but there is a little bit of imagery in it. You can see some of the shapes of the branches in the background and some of the shapes of the trees and some snowflakes, and it makes for a very interesting background overall, I think. And when I do reference photos, when I take my own reference photos, I always try to take photos that have interesting backgrounds, because I enjoy rendering backgrounds almost as much as I enjoy rendering the subjects. I think backgrounds are very important for a cohesive piece, so I always try to keep that in mind when I'm gathering my reference material, when I'm taking photos, etc. So right now what I'm doing is I am just laying in very fuzzy shapes. And the way I like to think about approaching backgrounds is to try to mimic my pencil strokes. Like, I try to have my pencil strokes mimic the shapes that I am drawing. So I'm doing very small circular motions, but I'm using a very light hand until I go over it and burnish. So I'm using lots of cool grays and whites and browns to create this very cold feeling in the background. I'm also going in with some warmer colors, some warmer browns, but still on the cool side of browns, just slightly warmer than the background behind them, to lay in the blurrier branches. And as you can see, for the blurrier branches, I put the shape in first very loosely, and I still put multiple layers over it, but I just leave the edges fuzzy, no hard edges, and then I go over with a lighter color and burnish it. It's almost like when you're trying to do like a gradation in marker, where you put the darker color down and you blend it out with a lighter color. It's very similar to that. So I'm going in, I'm laying in my fuzzy shapes, and then I'm burnishing mostly with my wax-based pencils. For pencils, the majority of this was done with Faber-Castell Polychromos, Prismacolor Premier pencils, and the Derwent drawing line of colored pencils, which work great for any type of landscape or natural themed artwork because of the colors. And I'm just doing this back and forth going in with my lighter grays where I need to, going in with my darker bluish grays and browns. Right now I'm outlining the branches that are going to be in the foreground, and I'm using like a deep red for that because there's going to be a lot of red in those branches, so they're going to stand out pretty well against that cool background. And I just wanted to get that laid in there so that I could see my lines more easily. And as you can see up on the top there, I'm putting in one of the branches that actually has a little bit more detail. I like to work top to bottom, back to front, typically on my backgrounds. So this one was giving me a little bit of an idea of how well my more detailed branches are going to stand out. And I believe this one wasn't even in my reference photo. I think I just added that branch in to make a more pleasing composition. As far as how I started this piece, up in the corner there, you can kind of see my basic outline. And what I did was I had taken multiple reference photos and I used GIMP, which is a photo editing software that you can get for free. It's similar to Photoshop, doesn't have all the aspects of Photoshop, but you can get quite a bit done in it, and it's free. So I used that quite a lot, and I used that to combine some reference photos. And then when I figured out exactly how I wanted my composition to be, I used the grid method, and I actually used gridded paper for that. I don't draw out the grid myself because I don't have the patience for all those straight lines. So I get gridded paper, and I drew my main forms and my main branches and of course my subjects on the gridded paper, and then I transferred it to my drawing paper after, and I believe this is Stonehenge. Yes, I did this artwork on Stonehenge, and it's a tinted Stonehenge. It's not very dark. I think it's the natural color of Stonehenge. So I always draw my stuff out on a separate piece of paper, even if I'm not doing the grid method. If I'm freehanding, I always draw it out on a separate, cheaper piece of paper, either tracing paper or just very, thin sketchbook paper, something to that effect, and transfer it to my drawing surface after. So that way there, I don't risk damaging my drawing surface while I am trying to work out my composition. So you'll see that up in the corner here and there, and I always keep that right with me so I can, in case I lose some of my lines, then I can kind of look back at my original sketch and see if I needed to add those back in and things like that. It's always good to have on hand. So what you just saw me do there, I have a water brush that I actually keep my OMS in, and I use that to blend out my colored pencil. So that's why you saw it get wet for a second and then it just dried immediately after. That's what that was. So I'm going back in. This takes a lot of layers to get that smooth look. A lot of layers, a lot of blending, and a lot of burnishing. And again, I can't emphasize it enough, no hard lines in the background. It's really, doing bokeh backgrounds really is all about abstract thinking. You know that it's a tree back there, but you have to fight the urge to actually draw out a tree. That's why I do it little by little. I break it down by shapes. I just break it down by the fuzzy shapes that I'm seeing, try to mimic that shape as best as possible and as loosely as possible. But loosely doesn't mean not using enough layers. It just means each layer is very fuzzy. I know a lot of times starting out people will do bokeh backgrounds and they think because it's fuzzy that they need to have a lot of that crayon-like texture showing, when that's not the case. You still want to use just as much colored pencil, because really if you think bokeh is fuzzy, but at the same time it's blurred out, so it's smooth. So really it's just your edges that are going to appear fuzzy. But you still need to use just as much pencil, especially before blending with OMS, or else you'll get stuck with some of that texture that is undesirable. If you're going for realism. I mean, this is all relative. This is how I work. Some people may like the look of that, and that's perfectly fine if that's what you're aiming for. But if it's not what you're aiming for, the best way to fight it is making sure you have enough layers of pencil. And you'll see I go back and forth a lot in this background. So I'm just going around the bird. Sometimes I'll use part of the background color to outline the birds, so that, or maybe even the color that's in the bird to outline it, just to separate it a little bit from the background so I can keep my edge there, because my subjects are going to have more of a hard edge against the background. And as you can see there, I have blended it out quite a bit from the previous shot. So basically what I did there is I took a lot of my OMS, well, I guess probably less OMS and more colored pencil is actually what the ratio was. So I went over some of it with OMS, but the bulk of it I blended out with a very light gray color from my Derwent Drawing line and the Derwent Drawing Chinese White. I do a lot of burnishing with those two colored pencils because the Derwent Drawing is a very soft pencil, and I feel like I've read somewhere that it's clay-based. So it lays down really strongly. It's just very beautiful to work with, but it's great to do as an overlayer and as a burnisher because it's just so rugged and it really pushes things into the paper to get that smooth look. And there I am again going over with my OMS and then back with my Chinese White. And some of these areas I did a little bit lighter at first because my reference photo had them lighter, but I didn't like how strong it was, so you'll see me come through later and darken them up. And just keep going back and forth. As you can see, I switch pencils quite often. My left hand usually has, obviously, is the part that's drawing, but then my right hand usually has like 4 or 5 pencils in it at a time. It's kind of crazy. But I just go back and forth with all these different grays and whites and browns, and I use the different brands interchangeably. A lot of times I'll use my wax-based pencils on the bottom as a base layer, and then I'll go through with details from my oil-based pencils. But there are times when I'll put a thin layer of my oil-based pencil down, and then I'll go back over it with wax-based to burnish it. So it really just depends on what the part that I'm drawing calls for. There really is no rhyme or reason necessarily. It's basically on instinct, or sometimes it's just on what color I need. Some brands have a specific color that I'm looking for, and that will determine what I'm laying down. This is all stuff that you'll figure out in your own work as you're working. Everybody has their own routine. And here we are just going into other aspects of it. I'm going to get that lower part. That lower part had a lot of dark colors, but I am not going to go in with black. I don't think I used black on any of this besides on the birds, because I want the highest contrast to be in the foreground. What you just saw me do there was use a stylus to imprint different lines on the tail of the Cardinal, because the tail of the Cardinal obviously is made of feathers, and there's little lines in the feathers, and I wanted to reserve the white of the paper for those lines, so I just used a stylus to imprint on the paper, and later on in the next video you'll see me go over those lines with colored pencil, and the lines will still be there. So back to this dark patch. What I am doing is I am laying in some of my dark grays and my browns, and I'm alternating between a brown color and a cool gray, because there is some brown in there, but it is quite cool. So I want to have that cool layer of gray over it to cool it down a bit. I don't want anything in the background to be too warm, even though there are some browns back there. Again, it's just like the contrast that I was speaking about earlier. I want my birds to stand out the most. So warmer colors tend to stand out in the foreground and cooler colors recede. So even if there are some warmer colors in the background, I need those warmer colors to be cooler than the warm colors that are in the foreground or on the subjects. And as you can see, I go back and forth until I get the formula that I like. There's really no set like, oh, use this amount of brown, use this amount of gray. Really, I'm just layering until I like the way it looks. And then I'm going in to blend out with a lighter color, because there are patches of light in there and I want them to blend seamlessly with the dark gray so there's no hard edges. So I'm just going in with that lighter color and softening that transition between the light and dark. I'm going around those branches, reserving the white of those because those are going to be a little bit warmer. So I'm trying not to get too much gray in there. And then I'm just going through and bringing that gray in other places. And putting some of these branches in. These branches, even though they're below and they look like they're in the foreground, they were kind of blurred out as far as, you know, camera distortion and everything goes. So I'm going to blur them out a little bit because they're not going to be part of my main focus. And that will bring more of the main focus on my more detailed birds and branches that are going to come forward later on. It's just another way to bring focus to your subject. If you want your subject to be in focus, then you need it to have the highest contrast, both value and color-wise, and as far as your pencil strokes go. You're going to want them to have the harder edges and the higher detail than your background. So I'm just going in. And these branches have, some of them have a little bit of ice around them. So that's why you're going to see it to be darker in the middle and a little bit of a white halo around them to give that cold, icy look. I really do enjoy doing winter pieces, even though a lot of times winter is kind of a dreary time. Sometimes it can be a lot of fun to just work in these muted colors and create that atmosphere, that cold atmosphere. I cannot stress enough how invaluable my Derwent drawing Chinese white is. It is such a good tool for this technique, and I used it quite a bit in my bokeh background that I did for my Blue Jay piece a few years ago, which I do have a video for that. I can link that. It's one of my older videos, so it's not the best quality, but I have one, so I can put that in a little card pop-up for you if you're interested in seeing it. Now I'm just laying in some of the blurrier branches. I consider these branches to be a part of the background, so that's why I'm putting them in this video. In the next video, you'll see me do the more detailed branches along with the birds that are going to be in the foreground. So again, we're just looking at abstract shapes. Because these are actually going to be blurred out, I am going in with the colors of the branches themselves, but I'm going to come back through with, again, my Chinese white and a light gray color, and I'm going to blur them out quite a bit. And I'm using a lot of waxed base pencils for this, a lot of the Derwent drawing, but I am using a little bit of my polychromos for some of the darker details and finer lines that I'm doing towards the ends of the branches, because they can keep a finer point. I rarely work with one brand of colored pencil throughout a whole piece. I'm typically using more than one, and I think that these three brands, the Polychromos, the Derwent Drawing, and the Prismacolor, are the three brands that I use the most. Even though I do own a few other brands, these tend to be my top three. I do a lot of nature-themed artwork, and so these brands work really well together for that. I'm just laying in some of those branches. I'm just looking at the shapes of the branches. I want to make sure that they're curving up in a natural manner, because a lot of branches do that. They like to reach for the sky, so to speak. And even though they look fairly detailed compared to the background behind them, this is really just my middle ground. They're still going to be very blurred out compared to the next set of branches. Now I'm coming back down and I am darkening some of that white. And this is where we're at for this stage. The next video is going to cover how I did the more detailed branches and the birds themselves. So come back next week and we will draw some birdies together. Thanks. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing more of my artwork, I'm on social media, so check out the links in the description below.